You may have already gone through almost half of your life with a resume that looks fine, a job that seems stable enough, a family that seems complete enough, a bank account that seems safe enough, and yet, sometimes, in the middle of a traffic jam one morning or a quiet evening after dinner, you suddenly find yourself asking, I've done all of this, but in the end, who am I? What am I really living for? That confusion and emptiness does not mean you are weak or ungrateful for what you have. It is a completely natural question that arises when one phase of life has finished its task, building, pushing yourself, proving yourself. At 40, the things that used to be enough no longer feel enough. There is another kind of calling, small but persistent, pulling you to look inward. This video will walk you through that call. If you are about to enter, are in, or have already gone through this stage, then this video is definitely for you. Why 40 and not some other age? Based on Carl Jung's ideas, we will explore why 40 is not the beginning of decline, but the noon of life, the moment when you have a rare opportunity to live more fully, more truthfully, and more peacefully with yourself. 1. The first mask of life. Right now, slow down a little and look back at the first half of your life. Who have you been in this world? Not in every way, but most likely the answers would be a good child, a good student, a good employee, the proper partner, the right kind of father or mother. Throughout those years, we learned to say the things we were supposed to say, to behave the way others expected, to hide away the parts of ourselves that didn't quite fit. Jung called that social face persona, the mask we wear to blend into the outer world. It isn't bad. In fact, without it, it would be hard to live and work among others. The problem begins when we forget it's just a mask and start to mistake it for who we really are. Jung wrote, "Wholly unprepared, we embark upon the second half of life, but we cannot live the afternoon of life according to the program of life's morning." This line goes straight to the heart of the early life mask. The morning of life, our 20s and 30s, is when we're busy building the ego, studying, building a career, getting married, buying a home, having children. We need a solid enough sense of self to stand in society. But if we step into the noon of life, still running the same old program, we will feel increasingly tired and cramped. Like wearing clothes that are 2 sizes too small and still telling ourselves, I just need to endure a bit more. You might see yourself in the picture of the devoted father who has spent years working hard, staying late, carrying pressure so his wife and children can have a comfortable life. He's used to putting others first, pushing his own feelings to the side. Then the day comes when the children grow up, no longer need him as much. The house gets quieter, and he suddenly realizes he doesn't know what to do with his own life anymore. He has all the roles, all the responsibilities, all the achievements, yet lacks something very hard to name. The feeling that he is living as himself. Something similar happens to those at the very top of success. Tiger Woods, one of the greatest golfers in history, went through a period of crisis, injuries, scandals, and loss of public image. In many conversations afterward, he spoke about having to return to inner values, to stillness, to meditation, and to healing his mind, not just his body. That is a very clear example. You can stand on top of the world and still carry an emptiness inside that titles and money can't reach. What we build on the surface is just the beautiful house of our outer life. If no windows are opening inward, sooner or later we will feel there isn't enough light. Persona, in Jung's view, is like a uniform we put on to join the social game. It's the neat suit, the polite smile, the I'm fine when someone asks how we are, even when we're falling apart inside. Wearing a uniform is not wrong, but if we wear the same one all our life, we forget that underneath we still have skin, contours, breath. When we fully identify with the mask, we lose other living parts of ourselves. The sadness we never allowed ourselves to feel. The creativity we pushed aside as impractical. the small dreams we once dismissed as stupid. Sigmund Freud, who once walked alongside Jung, emphasized instinct as the primary drive, deep, unconscious impulses that push our behavior. Jung did not deny this, but he saw more. He saw that humans are also driven by the need to become a meaningful being, a self that has a place in the community. That is why the first half of life is the time we step onto the social stage, try many roles, perform in many ways, and do everything we can to be recognized. It's just that, at some point, we begin to realize being applauded yet still feeling empty is a very profound kind of fatigue. You can imagine your life as a house. In the first half, we focus on building walls, putting on the roof, buying furniture and decorating it so it looks good in other people's eyes. We pay a lot of attention to how others look at it and say, "What a beautiful house." But if we forget to open the windows to let light in from outside, and also forget to open inner doors leading to the deeper rooms of the soul, the house will remain dark. Compliments will eventually fade away, and we will be left sitting in the dimness, unsure where we belong in the very space we worked so hard to build. At 40, many people start to see clearly the gap between the person I show the world and the person I really am when I'm alone. The wider the gap is, the more exhausted we feel. You still fulfill your responsibilities, still smile in meetings, still say the same familiar lines at the dinner table. But inside, a quiet yet urgent question starts to rise. Do I really want to live like this for another 10, 20 years? The important thing is this: there is nothing wrong with the first half of life. Jung never said we should quit our jobs, abandon our families, or refuse social roles. He simply reminded us that the program for the morning is no longer suitable for the noon. Persona has carried us through a long stretch of road, but to go further, we need to dare to loosen that mask, at least when we are alone, to hear who is still waiting underneath to breathe. When we begin to feel the tightness of the mask, when the achievements that once made us proud are no longer enough to cover the emptiness, that is not a sign of decline. It is a very serious invitation from within. And that invitation will become even clearer in the next stage of life, when crisis comes knocking and forces us to stop and ask what seems like the simplest yet hardest question of all. In the end, who am I if I take off every role I've been playing? 2. When crisis knocks. There comes a day when everything that seemed to be running normally suddenly feels out of sync. You still do the same job, drive the same car, return to the same familiar house, but inside it feels as if you're acting out a play you've performed far too many times. Sometimes you look in the mirror and see a face that has lived so many years, and a very real question rises. Who am I really? What is left of me after I've fulfilled all my responsibilities? That question often appears around 40, but few dare to say it out loud. We tend to label it as tiredness, feeling down, a bit of stress, then try to force ourselves back into the old rhythm. Jung wrote, "We cannot live the afternoon of life according to the program of life's morning. For what was great in the morning will be little at evening, and what in the morning was true will at evening have become a lie." In the first half of life, goals like money, status, stability, and recognition are genuinely important. They give us structure and a sense that we're not being left behind. But by the noon of life, when those things have been achieved to some extent, we begin to feel a different kind of hunger. Hunger for meaning, hunger for inner truth. At that point, the very values that once saved us from insecurity can become chains that hold us in an old life. Picture a woman who has given more than 20 years to her family. She runs the household, drives the kids to school, supports her husband's career, and does her best to be everyone's rock. Over time, she becomes used to putting herself last. Then the day comes when the children leave home one by one. The kitchen grows quiet and evenings become longer. She suddenly realizes she doesn't know what to do with her free time, doesn't know what she likes or wants. She may feel ashamed of her emptiness, blaming herself for being selfish just because she dares to want something for herself. But from Jung's perspective, this is not selfishness. It is an inevitable turning point. The soul is asking to be seen, not only through the roles of wife and mother, but as a whole human being. Another example comes from J.K. Rowling. Before Harry Potter was born, she went through a deep depression, was a single mother, financially struggling, and carried a heavy sense of failure. In that dark period, she began to write, each line like a way of facing her own fear and sorrow. Characters like Harry, Dumbledore, and Snape are not just products of imagination. They are psychological fragments she touched in the process of healing. Here we see clearly, crisis not only destroys, but it can also be the soil on which an entirely new life begins to be written. On the surface, a midlife crisis looks frightening. People talk about it jokingly. Buying a sports car, having an affair, suddenly quitting a job, changing hairstyle, going crazy at the gym. Those images are only the tip of the iceberg. Beneath is the confusion and pain of seeing everything that once made us feel safe suddenly lose its meaning. You may find yourself standing on what you thought was the top of a hill, only to realize this is not the mountain you truly wanted to climb. Some philosophers, like Nietzsche, emphasize that each person must create their own values, write their own meaning into life. That is powerful, but if we stop there, we can easily fall into another loop, constantly creating new goals, new projects, new values to cover up the emptiness. Jung goes a step further. He believes we cannot simply reinvent meaning at will, because within us there are unconscious parts, conflicts, and long-buried desires. True meaning cannot be made up. It must be listened to and discovered by facing the whole of who we are inside, both light and dark. A midlife crisis is, therefore, like the moment when the sun is at its zenith. The sun cannot keep climbing forever. By noon, it must change direction. Its light is no longer the morning rays full of promise, but begins to cast shadows, creating patches of shade and areas of darkness. Many people hate those shadows, pretend they don't exist, try to turn on more lights with shopping, trips, new relationships, anything to stay busy. But the darkness has its own role. It shows us the true shape of everything, including ourselves. In this view, crisis is not an enemy, but a messenger. It knocks on the door through symptoms, loss of interest, trouble focusing, irritability, insomnia, self-doubt, the feeling of living without really being alive. If we only try to silence the messenger with medication, work, or entertainment, we'll miss the important message. The soul is asking for a more honest conversation. Jung does not deny the importance of material life and achievement, but he reminds us that there comes a time when the question, "How am I living?" matters far more than "What have I achieved?" With that perspective, you can begin to relate to your crisis differently. Instead of asking, "How do I get rid of this feeling as fast as possible?" you might try asking, "What is this feeling trying to tell me?" Gradually, you may see the areas in your life that have always been ignored. Small wishes pushed aside, limits you never dared to admit, sorrows swallowed down because you didn't want to bother anyone. It is precisely these not allowed to exist parts that create inner tension, and at some point, they can no longer stay silent. That is when the story stops being just crisis and becomes an invitation to step into a completely different journey, the inward journey. But to step into it, we need enough courage to look straight at our own dark corners, the parts we have always avoided. Jung calls this shadow, the psychological shadow. So what does it really mean to face your own shadow? And how can you, from there, rediscover a deeper sense of self? That is the next doorway of the noon of life that we are about to open together. 3. Facing the shadow, finding the self. When the door of crisis has opened, the next question usually comes quickly. If what I used to lean on is no longer enough, then what can I rely on now? Jung's answer is not to look for a new, more glamorous role, but to turn inward and meet the whole of our true self, including the parts we've never wanted to look at. He called this journey individuation, the process of becoming an individual in the true sense, not in the sense of being separate, but in the sense of being whole. About this process, Jung wrote, "Individuation means becoming an individual, and insofar as individuality embraces our innermost, last, and incomparable uniqueness, it also implies becoming one's own self." Put simply, individuation is the journey of gathering back the parts of ourselves that were abandoned along the way and fitting them into a complete picture, instead of living only from the one fragment we consider beautiful or acceptable. But before we step into this process, we need to face one of the most important parts we usually leave behind: the shadow, the psychological shadow. The shadow is not something dark or sinful in a moral sense, but everything we were once taught is wrong, not allowed, or not who we are. It might be sensitivity that was labeled weak, anger that was shut down from childhood, creativity dismissed as useless, or even ambition we ourselves condemned as selfish. When pushed into the dark, these things do not disappear. They keep affecting us from behind, through overreactions, irrational dislikes, and moments when we see ourselves acting in ways we don't understand. In the first half of life, most of us only allow one part of ourselves to live, the part that fits the persona society applauds. We try to be strong, so we don't allow ourselves to be sad. We try to be good, so we don't allow ourselves to be angry. We try to be rational, so we don't allow ourselves to dream. But at the noon of life, when the old roles feel worn out, the buried parts start knocking, demanding to be recognized. At that point, instead of suppressing them again, our task is to look at them directly, call them by their true names, and learn to give them a rightful place in our life. There are insights we can only distill after we've gone through enough highs and lows. Toni Morrison is a beautiful example of that journey. She did not appear on the literary scene as a young prodigy. She began writing her first novel, The Bluest Eye, when she was 40. It was not just a book, but the crystallization of experience, of years of quiet observation, of deep questions about identity, race, pain, and motherhood. Later, she received the Nobel Prize in Literature. But if we only look at the glory, we miss what matters. To write that way, she had to face many painful parts inside herself and the shadows of her community. The second half of her life was not an upgraded copy of the first half, but a transformation from someone living inside templates to someone who dared touch inner truth and turn it into art. In ordinary life, you can see this journey in people who seem very fine. Someone known as strong, rational, the emotional anchor of the family, suddenly wonders why they are so exhausted. He starts allowing himself to cry for the first time in many years, to share his real feelings with his wife, his close friend, and even a therapist. He realizes that behind the label strong is a child who was once very afraid of being left behind. So he always had to prove himself, always had to brace. When he dares to admit that he too is vulnerable, that he needs a hug, needs help, he does not become worse. On the contrary, he becomes more human, softer, and easier to breathe. That is a very clear step in individuation. He is no longer just an image, but gradually becomes a person who contains both joy and sorrow, strength and weakness, light and dark. Compared to Sigmund Freud, who is famous for emphasizing the struggle between instinct and society, Jung placed more weight on inner reconciliation. He did not just ask, "What drives you to act?" but also, "How can the different parts of you coexist without destroying each other?" You do not need to kill your anger to be a kind person. You need to understand it, to know when it is protecting you and when it is harming you. You do not need to crush ambition to live peacefully. You need to listen to whether that ambition comes from fear or from a genuine desire to grow. Inner reconciliation is not purifying yourself or becoming perfect, but learning to give each part its proper place, like rearranging an orchestra so that every instrument can sound in harmony. On this journey, Jung also spoke of anima and animus, the inner feminine in a man and the inner masculine in a woman. This is not about gender, but about psychological qualities, reason and intuition, softness and decisiveness, caring and leading. In the first half of life, we may allow ourselves to live only one pole. Men must be tough, women must be gentle. But as we step into the noon of life, many people feel a deep urge to expand who they are. A man wants to learn to talk about his feelings without shame. A woman wants to say no when needed, to pursue a project of her own, not just be the support system. As these two poles gradually balance, we are no longer just playing our role. We start to feel we are being ourselves. Facing the shadow in our inner opposites is rarely comfortable at first. It can make you feel as if you're betraying the good version of yourself you've tried so hard to maintain. But in truth, you are only stopping the betrayal of other parts of you. When you dare to admit that sometimes you are angry with your children, bored with your spouse, tired of your friends, fed up with life, you do not become a bad person. You become a real one. And only when you are honest with yourself do you have a solid base from which to change anything in a lasting way. So how do we begin this process without being swept away by a sense of chaos? One simple way is to practice self-observation. You can spend a few minutes each day writing down what you felt that day, when you were annoyed, when you were happy, when you were discouraged. Don't rush to judge, just record. Over time, you'll see repeating patterns, situations that always irritate you, types of people who always trigger you, sentences you always swallow. These are the footprints of the shadow, of the unlived parts. Once you recognize them, you can start responding a little differently. Pause and breathe before snapping back. Say, "I'm not doing so well today," instead of laughing it off. And allow yourself to say no to a request that isn't right for you. At the same time, nurturing your own joys and passions is also a powerful way to reconnect with your true self. Maybe you once loved painting, writing, playing music and gardening, but abandoned them because you didn't have time or couldn't make money from it. In the second half of life, these activities can become a bridge that carries you from the world of roles into the world of the soul. You don't need to become an artist. You just need to allow yourself to do something with no goal, no scoreboard, simply because it makes you feel alive. From the outside, individuation may not look dramatic. Not everyone quits their job, changes careers, or turns their life upside down. Sometimes the biggest changes are quiet. You speak more honestly, live more slowly, choose fewer things, but do them with full presence. You still live in the same house, but the inner experience is different. Because now, instead of living only in the allowed rooms, you start opening each door, stepping into spaces long closed off, dusting them, rearranging them, and turning on the lights. And as you open those doors, you may begin to notice something interesting. Beneath the layer of everyday rational consciousness, beneath the thoughts you can put into words, there is another level that is always quietly moving. It speaks through images, strange little stories that appear in your dreams, brief flashes of intuition that catch your attention, the pull you feel towards something you can't yet explain. Jung believed this was the soul's own language. So what is your soul saying to you through those dreams and intuitions? That is the next chapter of the Noon of Life that we're going to listen to together. 4. When the soul speaks. When you stop running from your shadow and dare to look it in the eye, something else quietly begins to happen. Your inner world comes alive. It's not chaos, more like a long closed room being cracked open, the air starting to move. Your dreams become clearer, like short films loaded with emotion. Memories you thought were buried suddenly return, strangely vivid. Your intuition sharpens, as if some part of you knows things before your mind can put them into words. Many people in the second half of life notice this through very ordinary sentences. I don't know why, but lately I've been dreaming a lot. Or, for some reason this just doesn't feel right, even though there's no clear evidence. Jung once wrote, "The dream is the small hidden door in the deepest and most intimate sanctum of the soul." For him, dreams are not nonsense that show up when we sleep, but another language of the mind. By day, we talk to each other with logic, plans, and numbers. At night, the soul speaks to us in images, symbols, and strange stories. If consciousness is the surface of a lake, then dreams are the ripples that appear when a stone hits the bottom. We don't see the stone, but we can sense it through the circles spreading out. Think of the times you woke from a dream with your emotions still intact, sad, scared, relieved, or filled with a vague longing. Sometimes you don't remember the dream clearly at all. You just carry a feeling, like a faint scent that lingers. That's when the deepest part of you has just tried to send a message up to the surface. In midlife, our defenses thin out, and what has been pressed down for years starts to find a way up. Dreams, intuitions, the shiver you feel before a painting, a piece of music, a story, all of these can be little doors the soul opens so you can look back at yourself. Salvador Dali, the famous surrealist painter, is a vivid example. He was deeply influenced by psychoanalysis and dreams, to the point where many of his works look like dreams painted out. Melting clocks, impossibly long legs, distorted spaces, half real, half fantasy images. Dali didn't try to decode each detail like a puzzle. He let his dreams soak into him, then express them through color, line, and shape. In him, we see what Jung meant. The unconscious doesn't just store problems. It is also an endless reservoir of creativity and meaning if we dare to listen and work with it, instead of trying to control it. Closer to home, you may have had a recurring dream about the old house. In the dream, you walk into the house you lived in as a child, move through familiar rooms, and see objects that have long disappeared. You might wake with heaviness or a nameless longing. If you sit with it, allow yourself to look closely, then tell it to someone you trust. You may realize there are still things unsaid, wounds unacknowledged in that first house of your life. When you dare to face it, speak it, cry for it, a strange relief often follows, not because the past has been fixed, but because, at last, a part of you has been recognized. For Jung, dreams and intuitions are not random phenomena. They are how the unconscious, the part under the water, tries to communicate with consciousness, the part above. He doesn't encourage us to treat dreams as prophecies, nor to depend on them blindly. He simply invites us to see them as coded letters sent up by the soul. Some letters speak of fears we have never dared to name. Some remind us of old desires we shelved long ago. Some warn that we are living too far from our true values. When we ignore these letters for too long, they can turn into symptoms: anxiety, depression, insomnia, and emotional instability. Here, Jung differs from some existentialists like Sartre. Sartre emphasizes that human beings are completely free to define themselves, that we are condemned to be free, forced to choose meaning in a world that has none built in. It's a powerful view, but a lonely one. Jung agrees we are responsible for our lives, but he adds another depth. We don't build ourselves from zero. We enter life with a psychological structure, a personal and collective unconscious, symbols, and stories larger than the ego. Dreams, intuitions, haunting images are like blurred maps the soul has drawn, inviting us to explore. We are not controlled, but we are not making it all up either. We are in dialogue with a depth that was there before us. So, what can we actually do with all these signals, besides finding them strange? One simple step many people find helpful is to start recording their dreams. You don't have to understand them right away. Just keep a notebook by your bed and, each morning, write down whatever you remember, even if it's fragmented. That small act alone is a way of telling your soul, I'm willing to listen. Over time, you'll notice recurring themes: a road, a house, the sea, stairs, a missed train. Each symbol may carry a meaning that is deeply personal to you. You can also expand your inner language through art. Sketch a scene from your dream. Write a short journal entry from the point of view of a dream character. Choose a piece of music that matches how you felt on waking, not to produce art, but to give the unconscious another channel to speak through. When you share these experiences with a small, safe group or with someone who understands Jung's work, you gain extra perspectives, not to impose on yourself, but to shed more light on what you have already felt but not yet named. What matters most is keeping a gentle, respectful attitude. Don't rush to pin fixed meanings. Dream of water means this, dream of teeth means that. Jung always stressed that symbols are highly personal. For one person, a house may mean warmth. For another, it is a prison. For one, the sea is freedom. For another, it is a danger. Only you, if you patiently converse with yourself, will know what a symbol is carrying in the story of your life. As you start living with the awareness that your soul is always whispering through dreams, intuitions, and feelings, you'll begin to sense a subtle shift in how you live. You try less to control everything and listen more. You notice the moments when your heart sinks, when your eyes suddenly grow wet, when your body tightens for no obvious reason. You realize you don't just have one I that thinks, but another part that feels, remembers, longs, and fears. And when those two parts begin to talk to each other, your outer life may not change dramatically, but inside, your world can become much more spacious. That's when you're no longer just getting by on autopilot, but beginning to truly live with a deeper presence. And once you've touched that depth, another question naturally arises. If my soul is speaking to me, if I'm starting to understand myself more, then what does this noon of life actually want me to do with my time here? That question leads us into another vital part of the journey. What is the true meaning of 40 and of the second half of life through Jung's eyes? 5. The true meaning of the noon of life. By now, you may have begun to see the second half of life is not just what's left, but a phase with its own very specific meaning. Everything you've gone through, building, crisis, facing the dark, listening to dreams, is not just a series of separate events, but like layers of soil being turned over to reveal a deeper underground spring. It is at this noon that the question is no longer how to go faster or higher, but what you are ultimately living for, and whether you are being honest with yourself. From here, the true meaning of 40 becomes clearer. It is not a full stop at the end of youth, but a turning point where, for the first time, you come back to yourself seriously and gently. Jung wrote, "Individuation means becoming an individual, and insofar as individuality embraces our innermost, last, and incomparable uniqueness, it also implies becoming one's own self." In the first half of life, we usually ask, how do I become a person of value in other people's eyes? At the noon of life, the question shifts to, how do I live true to who I really am? The difference looks small in words, but is huge in feeling. One side is striving to have, the other is the courage to become. When that happens, the way we measure value also starts to change. Instead of only asking what position you've reached, how much you earn, what you own, you begin to ask, today, was I kind to myself? Was I truly present in my conversations with the people I love, or just drifting through? Am I using my energy to build another layer of armor or to go deeper into something meaningful? At this noon, achievements still have their place, but they no longer dominate the stage. Balance, contribution, love, and inner peace move to the front. Listen, for example, to the story of Vera Wang, a well-known Chinese-American fashion designer, and perhaps a beautiful illustration of this. She didn't become a designer in her 20s. Before that, she was a figure skater, then a fashion editor. Only at 40 did she switch into designing wedding dresses, a decision many might call late. Yet that choice in the second half of her life opened an entirely new chapter. She became one of the most famous designers in the world. What matters is not only the success, but the way she allowed herself to listen to her true passion and start over after many other roles. Her story challenges the belief that meaning and passion belong only to youth. It tells us that noon is when the light is high enough for us to clearly see our own path. In everyday life, you may have met, or you may be, someone on a similar journey. A person who has spent many years in a high-pressure, high-paying job, but finds it harder and harder each morning to pull themselves out of bed. After the crisis, after many sleepless nights, they decide to turn in a different direction, studying to become a counselor, becoming a teacher, or spending more time on community art. Their income may not increase, may even decrease, but their sense of being alive grows fuller. At the end of the day, they don't just feel they got through another day, but that they truly touched someone's life in a deeply human way. That is the shift from living to achieve to living in alignment with the self. From this angle, inner maturity is not a blinding mountaintop, but more like entering a new movement in the symphony of life. The early movements, youth, tend to be lively, fast, and full of catchy melodies. By the third or fourth movement, the tempo may slow, but the depth increases. You begin to hear the layers of harmony, the small notes that once seemed trivial, but now carry the soul of the piece. Life is the same. If we only rush through the opening movement, we miss the chance to truly hear the subtle resonance of the later ones. The philosopher Schopenhauer once pessimistically claimed that life is a cycle of desire and disappointment. When we get what we want, we grow bored. When we don't, we suffer. To some extent, looking at the first half of life, we can see he's not entirely wrong. But Jung believed humans are not condemned to stay in that loop forever. When individuation takes place, when we dare to look inward and live closer to our true self, our desires are no longer led purely by lack and comparison, but by a sense of meaning. We stop chasing everything just because everyone does, and begin choosing a few things that truly fit us, then live fully with them. At that point, disappointment changes color. It's no longer the feeling that life is meaningless, but the ordinary sadness and joy of a journey that has direction and depth. Practically, this can start with very small steps. You can set aside a fixed time each week for a long-neglected interest: drawing, reading, gardening, writing, or learning an instrument. You can also try joining a volunteer group, a community project, or simply choose to really listen when someone needs to talk. These actions are not to rack up good person points, but to help you feel again that you are not only a worker, a bill payer, a role performer, but a presence with unique value, capable of connection and offering. When we consciously live closer to our true values, a quiet kind of peace begins to appear. Not the peace of everything is fine, but the peace of being okay even when things are imperfect. You may still struggle financially, still worry about your children, still argue now and then with your loved ones. But underneath it all, you know you are more on track than before. You no longer feel like you're performing for the world, but like you're living your own life, with everything it includes, good and bad, light and dark, easy and difficult. Seen this way, the 40s and 50s are not a downward slope, but a pivot point. It's when we have enough experience to understand ourselves better, enough wounds to value peace, enough bumps and bruises to know what is truly worth keeping. From here, the noon of life is not a technique, but an invitation to live honestly, in harmony with your inner world, and to grow in depth, not just in age. And having walked with you this far, perhaps it is time to close this journey with a larger view. In the end, according to Jung, what makes 40 the true starting point of a life that is genuinely lived? Looking back over the whole journey, a clear pattern appears. 40 is not the finish line of youth, but a doorway into a different way of living. The first half of life helps us build, strive, and prove ourselves. The second half invites us to live true to our essence, to reconcile the opposites within, to listen to the quiet voice of the soul, and to recreate the meaning of our life in our own way. Midlife crisis, in Jung's light, is no longer a problem to be extinguished, but a sign that you've grown too much to keep living only through a mask. It is an invitation to come home to the shadow, to the dreams, to the parts of you that were once abandoned, so that from there you can step into a new life that is steadier and gentler. Jung said, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." Perhaps the first step into the noon of life is simply daring to sit down, listen to yourself honestly, try one small new thing, or write down a dream that still lingers after a long night. If you'd like, you can begin right now by sharing your own journey in the comments below. Maybe that's the quickest way to practice what we've just reflected on. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so we can keep walking together with content that helps you understand yourself more deeply and live more fully in the half of life ahead. See you next time.